Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I know that we have a lot of people signed in today to hear from Dr. Temple Grandin. We are honored to have Dr. Temple Grandin with us here today. We have students from various ISDs across the state of Texas. We have professionals, and we have people attending all across the U.S. today to hear you speak. I'm Allison Scobart, Consolidated Planning Group. Consolidated Planning Group is a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We're domiciled in Texas, Sugar Land, Texas, but we serve families all across the United States. We have over 30 years of experience, and our whole firm is nuanced in working with families who have a loved one with a disability. We are nationally certified as Social Security advisors and members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We help people plan for the future. We help solve answers to questions like who's going to care for my child when I'm gone? How much money do I need to fund a special needs trust? We help set up ABLE accounts, and we do a lot of advocacy. And the advocacy that we do is through our webinars. We have a Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel that you can subscribe to for free. And on that YouTube channel, there's over 350 webinars on topics surrounding planning for special needs. There might be topics like guardianship, special needs trust, SSI, and Medicaid waivers, you name it, it's out there. We've tried to label those webinars in such a manner that you can kind of really look at the topic for the step that you're on in your planning journey and select the one that works for you. I always like to talk about the difference of a financial planning firm that serves special needs as opposed to a regular financial planning firm. Fewer than 0.1% of all financial advisors in the U.S. focus on special needs planning. When it comes to special needs planning, your situation is specialized. It is critically important that we preserve the eligibility for state and federally funded programs for your child. And our whole practice is nuanced in special needs, so that way we can have money in the right buckets to preserve that eligibility and get your loved one the benefits that they need and will benefit from the most while you are alive and also once you are gone. So without any further ado, we don't want to take away from the time from Dr. Temple Grandin. She's going to be talking to us about great minds are not all the same. And I personally had the distinct pleasure at the end of 2023 to hear her speak at a conference in Beaumont, Texas. And it was an extraordinary talk and one that was very, very encouraging and provides so much hope. So let's talk about Temple for a minute. Sorry, Temple, you'll probably hate this part. Temple's pretty amazing, and if you haven't seen her movie, she has a movie called Temple Grandin, and it's a story of her life. Temple had a mom that didn't take no for an answer and just was always 100% behind Temple, and Temple has soared to heights that one could only imagine. With her doctorate, she's also a professor of animal sciences at Colorado State University. She was named the top 100 most influential people in the world in the heroes category. And I just wanted to mention that she's also a very well-known author. She had her most recent book. She has many books, but her most recent book was 2022, and it's visual thinking that you can see here on the screen. She also did Navigating Autism in 2021, so you can check those books out. You can find them on Amazon. And also, I just wanted to mention, if you haven't seen her movie, you can find that movie on HBO Max, Hulu Premium, and you can pay $3.99 and see it on Amazon Prime. And I would just love to encourage each and every one of you to check out that movie. You'll be glad that you did. Temple, without anything further, I just want to say on a housekeeping perspective, we are in webinar mode today, and what that means to you is that we can't see you or hear you, but we know you're there. For those that have attended our webinars in the past, you know we like to take questions throughout the presentation, and we're going to do that today. So what we ask you to do is to put your questions in the chat box. We have a lot of people out here today. We're going to do our very best to get to as many questions as possible. We may not be able to get to all of them, but just put those questions in the chat box and we'll take them throughout the presentation. Having said that, thank you again, Temple, for being here, and I'm going to have you take it away.
Well, it's great to be here by Zoom. Just about froze to death yesterday. We had a record-breaking cold, 19 degrees below zero where I live. Yeah, my electric heating barely can keep up. I had a coat on in the house. It's a lot better today. I just went outside today, and it's a whole lot better. But I'm going to be talking about different ways that people think and how they approach problem solving. And we need all the different kinds of minds to solve problems. And that's my book, Visual Thinking, and I'll be presenting some of the science in that different kinds of thinking exist. We can go to the next slide. We need the skills of the people that think differently. One of the reasons you want to hire people that might be on the autism spectrum or dyslexic or whatever is you need their skills. It's that simple. Let's go to the next question. Next slide, rather. The first step is realizing that thinking is different. I thought everybody thought in pictures, okay, and Allison just mentioned the HBO movie. That shows exactly the way I think. And pictures pop up in my mind. That is how I think. I used to think everybody thought that way. Well, it was a shocker to me to find out in my late 30s that not everybody thought in pictures. Let's go to the next slide. And visual thinking really helped me in my work with cattle, because one of the first things I looked at is what are the animals seeing? Nobody thought to look at that. If you think verbally, you wouldn't think about that a shadow or a reflection or some little thing that we don't notice is going to affect the behavior of the cattle. But it did. And that made me good at animal behavior because I'd observe all the little things that the animals do. Go to the next slide. Like, for example, here's a reflection on the entrance of a chute, and it would make the animals stop. Well, maybe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that would be gone. Other people didn't notice those things. I noticed detail. We can go to the next slide.
Temple, tell us about that. I know I've seen your movie, and I know, kind of a little about how this works, but Temple herself is diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And one thing that I didn't mention in her intro is that she totally and utterly transformed the way the cattle industry goes to slaughter in the U.S. So I know you're going to tell us a little bit more about that. So we're excited to hear about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I did want to make sure everyone knows I was autistic, no speech until age 4. Maybe I should have introduced myself better on that. I had great early education. I'm living independently, but there's a lot of people on the more severe end of the spectrum that are going to need your services. And Allison was telling me all about that. The thing about autism is now I'm going to start getting ahead of myself here, so I'm probably better not do that. But I've worked 25 years in construction. In fact, cattle in Texas are handled in a center track restrainer system that I developed 30 years ago. It's on all your big plants. Tyson's got it. They got it back when they were IBP. I've got my stuff out there. But as I've learned more about how people think, I have gotten better and better insight into how they approach solving a problem. And we need all the different ways of approaching solving a problem. I'm a big NASA fan. Now, being a visual thinker, I might see something that's going to be a risk. Now, of course, I'm following this door that fell off the airplane. Did they leave the bolts out? Well, they left them out. And there's probably no marks on the bracket where they should have been tightened against it. You see, I see it. Or they leave a little wire off that keeps the nut from unscrewing all the way. You see, I see it. Yes, and the drawings have been published. Wall Street Journal had the drawings. Yep, I know exactly how it works now. See, but that's something that I see. And then I read something. This is not fun to read in the airport. Private equity owns the company that built the fuselages. As I'm looking at the picture of these planes with no tails and no wings, they really look weird. I'm reading about private equity owns them, and loose rudder bolts. That's worse. Can't steer without the rudder. Kind of need that. I'm in the airport. I shortly got on a plane. Well, from what it sounds like, you're doing really good things. You're really, really helping people. And we've got too many financial people out in the world that are just ripping people off. And I'm not like it when I hear about dermatology clinics bought out by private equity, and private equity is, oh, let's sell all the expensive procedures when you don't need to do expensive procedures. That is something that really bothers me. And well, here's a good question. Why would somebody want a diagnosis after 50? If they've been in a good career, they don't need it from a career standpoint, but it helps with relationships. I have another book, so I don't have a copy of it here. It's called Different, Not Less. Different, Not Less. It's 18 people diagnosed later in life, and it gave them insight into their relationships and why they had problems in relationships. Career has given me meaning in life. I'm basically, when it comes to identity, I'm career first. And I've done a lot of really interesting things, been to a lot of interesting places. And the next slide will show you what I found in the launch pad base. It was 6 years ago. This raccoon was wandering around in there, around fueling equipment. Stuff I don't want him chewing on or peeing on or doing something else on it. That's seeing risk. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there's different approaches to problem solving. The object visualizer like me. I'm an object visualizer. HBO movie showed exactly how I think. I see it. I'd see the risk. I saw the raccoon, and then I saw the open electrical box with wires in it. Then, right along with stuff about reading about private equity building airplanes, this is not something I really want to read about, is really disgusting article about rats eating wiring in cars. And they like the environmentally friendly soy wires. They find them really delicious. And then the car's not going to start after that. Mathematicians calculate risk. What's the chance that a rat's going to eat the wiring in my car? Oh, your Prius got eaten by rats? It probably had environmentally friendly soy-based wiring. Verbal thinkers discuss it. Yes, let's go to the next slide. 3 different kinds of thinking. And then a lot of people end up being mixtures of different kinds of thinking. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I'm an object visualizer. So what kind of stuff am I good at? Inventing mechanical things, art and graphic design, photography, working with animals, and highly skilled trades. And there's a segment of the autistic population where a highly skilled trade is where they need to go. And then they're not going to, then hopefully they won't need your services. Because they'll have a good job and they'll have money. But I've worked with a lot of highly skilled tradespeople that were definitely on the autism spectrum. They were some of the best, and they're not getting replaced. Been on a lot of questionable elevators lately. They're not getting service. Then you have a spatial visualizer. This is your mathematician, good at everything mathematical. They think in patterns, not pictures. I think in photographs. Computer programmers, engineers, chemistry and physics. Music and math. Music and math go together, and art and mechanics go together. And I discuss this in a lot more detail in my book, Visual Thinking, The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions. We'll go to the next slide. And then, of course, you've got your...
When I heard you speak before, I think one of the biggest messages that I heard so loud and clear in your talk was it's really about meeting these kids, our loved ones, our family members with disabilities where they are. So what if they can't do math? So what if they're bad at math? That it's really about meeting
I have
them where they are.
Chapter in this book called Screened Out on kids that are terrible in math getting screened out, but you need us non-mathematicians.
That's right. That's right.
And I think but I also need the mathematicians. If I'm building a food processing plant, I got to have mathematicians for boilers and refrigeration. I don't understand that stuff. You see, you need to have the whole team. We do the mechanical stuff. You see, you need to have.
It's about finding strengths, right? Strengths.
That's right.
Of where
finding strengths.
They are.
And work. My mother always encouraged my ability in art. And and the people that are good at art oftentimes are often good at mechanics. And we've got a gigantic shortage right now of the very high-end skilled trades. And we need these people. We need people that tighten bolts on airplanes and put the little wire in it that prevents the nut from coming off the bolt. Now I'm seeing the plane's rudder when they wiggle it during the checklist to make sure it works. Yeah, let's make sure the bolts are tightened there. But you see, these things come up in my mind like a series of slides. And other thing is, I see too many parents baby a child that's got a disability. Now, this is kind of getting off the subject when I normally talk to businesses about, but I'm seeing 16-year-olds fully verbal that have never gone shopping by themselves. They've never ordered food in a restaurant. They don't know how to use the public restrooms. Just basic skills. And the moms can't let go. They can't let go when I suggest that their child should go in a store and buy printer paper, for example. And they're not learning the skills they could be learning. See, the problem with autism is you're going from Einstein to somebody who can't dress themselves. But even that guy that can't dress himself may be able to learn to dress himself, but he will need your services. But now, I just got off a webinar before I came here on talking to parents. We got to look at what the person can do rather than what they cannot do. Okay, now verbal thinkers are in all of the verbal kinds of fields. Well, the approach a person with autism uses, you can get a visual type of autistic like me. See, when you get a label like autism, you tend to get an extreme object visualizer, an extreme mathematician. You get the mixture, they're going to be a mixture. But the autistic will either be one or the other, extreme math, extreme visual. And then there's a third type of autistic that's a extreme word thinker. And they'll know every single fact about history or about baseball players or some other thing they're really interested in. You know what kind of jobs they can be super good at? Quiet, specialized retail. And these are real examples: selling cars, selling sporting goods, selling specialized financial products. There's been a couple of those. Selling specialized business insurance, where they're appreciated for their knowledge of a product. Let's go to the next slide.
We had a quick question in the chat that says, how do we know what approach someone with autism uses? How do we identify if they're verbal or picture thinkers, or how do we identify
Well, when they're
that?
a young kid, you expose them to all kinds of stuff. Okay, the math kid's good at math. Then what you need to do with that math kid is move them ahead. Move them ahead. Don't have them do baby math. The algebra book that I'll use as a doorstop would be a door for that kid. The art kid, let's make sure the kids have access to tools. Let's start out with Legos, and then we need to graduate to tools. The word thinker kid's not going to care about tools or art. You see, I'm a big believer in exposing them to lots of different things and kind of see what they gravitate towards. Because if you don't expose them, they're not going to, you won't know. You won't know. Thousands of details as your son memorizes. Well, this is making me think about an auto parts store that loves their autistic employee because he memorized every part number in the warehouse and he doesn't need to use the computer. Yeah, that's, you got to expose them. And here's the science behind the different kinds of thinking. Go to the next slide. If somebody's got a problem with sound, I can't help them with that. And then a lot of so-called normal people are mixtures. But you question them, they might be kind of some of each, but they usually will not be super good at one of them. Let's go to the next slide. Turns out I got some big visual thinking circuits in my brain. Let's go to the next one. We can go to the next slide, show off some more circuits in my brain. Okay, here's a child that loves art, Legos, and music. I was exposed to musical instruments. I couldn't figure out how to play them. Well, expose them to the Legos, expose them to the musical instruments. And when he gets older, you go, I saw a sad case of like an 18-year-old still building things out of Legos. Nobody thought to introduce him to tools. I was using hammer, saw, and a screwdriver by 3rd grade and a little tiny handsaw in 5th grade. And I was taught how to use these things safely.
I'd like to take a moment here because, You truly had an extraordinary mother. Can you share with us some of the things, you talk about some of the tools that you were using at a younger age and some of the things that you were exposed to and things like that. Can you just briefly tell us before we move on some of the things that your mom did that you feel in your life today made all the difference in the world?
Well, some of the things she did was unique to her, but some of the stuff was 50s upbringing. All the kids were playing with tools at 3rd grade. They all were, the whole neighborhood was. That was 50s. And I have grandparents come up to me all the time, and they find out they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. But granddaddy learned how to work. So a lot of kids aren't learning just enough skills. And then with the autistic kids, that just makes it worse. And mother always encouraged my ability in art. I would just draw the same horse head over and over again. She said, well, let's draw the whole horse. I didn't know how to read in 3rd grade. She taught me how to read out loud with phonics. It would have been big trouble if I hadn't learned how to read. Phonics was what worked for me. For another kid, it's going to be sight words. And these are things that, here's a kid that struggles with personal interactions. Where I had good personal interactions was friends who shared interests. Okay, and when we were little kids, it was playing a hockey table game together. When I was older, it was riding horses. Friends through shared interests. And you have to teach them. See, the other thing in the 50s, social rules were taught in a much more structured manner to all children. Like I'd go to the store, and if I touched too much stuff, the clerks would say, only touch the things you're going to buy. Grown-ups corrected kids no matter where they went, also in the 50s, because there's a lot of other people on the autism spectrum. They might be more the Asperger type, where they ended up having jobs and keeping them. But diagnosis later in life gave them insight into relationships. How do we minimize anger and frustration? Well, if the child's nonverbal, you better give them a way to communicate. I can remember screaming my head off because I couldn't. Object visualizers like to look at pictures. Verbal thinkers want to read about it, and the visual spatial looks at both. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the next slide brings up a point that's really important in a lot of businesses. They had art students, science students, and literature students create planets. And you know what I was shocked about this study? The word thinkers did no planning for their planet, where the teams of mathematicians and visual thinkers, they planned their planet. So in verbal stuff, you get like politicians have these great big broad concepts, but how do you actually do it? There's no specifics. And this is a big problem. Okay, I get asked about something like an inclusive classroom. I want to get rid of the LED lights that flicker. That's something I want to get rid of. And you can test them with slow motion video. Maybe about 20% of the population you serve will have a problem with this. Makes a lot of behavior problems. Also, I cannot remember long strings of verbal instruction. Give it to me in a pilot's checklist format. That would save a ton of jobs. It's going to help with all this executive functioning stuff. Checklists. Pilots have to use checklists. And it would save jobs because, okay, tell me the task I'm going to do, write them down on the checklist. Tell me how to clean the McDonald's ice cream machine, take apart steps. Cleaning steps, reassembly steps. Simple checklist. Pilots do them every single flight, and they are required to do it. A very, very simple thing. Aviation figured it out years ago. Let's go to the next slide. Verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize because it's top down. But you see, I think bottom up. Specific examples of jobs that worked for people with autism. Video game addicts, then gotten off of them with car mechanics. I found the car mechanics was more interesting. I had 5 or 6 of those cases. Then I start to see patterns in the data. And okay, puberty. Yep, what they're saying in the chat's absolutely right. I got more anxious at puberty. Now, others said it's helpful when they go into puberty. It just depends. But I got more anxious and got worse at puberty. And bullying or teasing on top of that was really bad. Worst part of my life was teenage years. Then as I went through my 20s, the anxiety got worse and worse and worse. My health was horrible, nonstop colitis. That's all discussed in my old autobiography. I describe thinking in pictures. Discuss my successful use of antidepressant drugs that I've been on for 40 years. I think I'd be dead if I hadn't taken those drugs. I had so many health problems. And even though that book is 26 years old now, the information on the medication is still accurate. I just did a lit review yesterday because I'm updating some stuff, and it's still pretty much the same. Yeah, because the private equity people don't want to put long-term research into finding new psychiatric drugs. Nope, they pulled back a lot of the research. Let's go to the next slide. The early inventors were all object visualizers, making mechanical devices. Yeah, it's all about money now. Yeah, and I have a problem with that. And reading, here's three, I read one word and then three words. Sitting in the Denver airport, finding out that the company that built that fuselage was sold to private equity. And then I heard loose rudder bolts. Yes, I'm sitting at the airport having breakfast. I read that. Wall Street Journal. Where I go, Wall Street Journal does a good job of digging this stuff up. And then the planes look so weird when they have no wings and no tails. They are the weirdest looking things. And of course, I was looking at that picture. It's like a drone got up in the top of the factory and showed that.
We had
Okay.
a question, Temple. Did you have a personal experience with cyclical vomiting?
No, I never did.
During your scene?
Never had
Okay.
that problem. Never had that problem.
And,
No, my
and then,
problems, health-wise, were more colitis, and then I have some autoimmune. I've got eczema, and I've got that psoriatic arthritis, whatever it's called. I mean, sort of simmering autoimmune problems. I put topical stuff on small amounts on it. They don't let the rashes get going. But I sort of simmering autoimmune problems. Gastrointestinal issues, they go with autism. You got a nonverbal client and a lot of bad behavior. The first thing you've got to do is rule out a hidden painful medical problem. You got to rule that out. You might try some acid reflux.
I think those gastrointestinal problems also run hand in hand with ADHD as well.
Yeah, they do.
We have someone in the chat box that says, do you have any advice for challenging behavior redirection?
Well, first of all, I need to know more about what the challenging behavior is. You see, one of the problems we got here is a lot of these questions are not specific enough. You see, what I've learned about verbal thinking is that it doesn't have any specifics. Okay, maybe I have too much detail. And here's somebody asking about preparing a kid for middle school. If you're going to switch schools, let's get the surprise factor down. Visit the school, or at least look at the website. But we want to reduce the surprise factor on new things. That's what, let's say going to the airport, and there's a program now, Travel Wiki thing, that gives the airports that will let you do practice trips through security, because you want to cut down on the surprise factor. Okay, the security guard might touch you. Well, you need to know that before you go there. Because surprises scare. Surprises scare.
So
well,
we had one
I might have
person
the wrong
that
set of slides up here because I thought I was talking more to financial people.
We are all across the board, parents with people with disabilities, students, ISDs, and professionals.
And I have another book that I think is going to be helpful on a lot of the behavior problems. It's called The Way I See It. This book right here. It's a lot of little short chapters. I think that would be helpful.
What do you think about hitting, slapping, biting other students at school, but the behavior doesn't happen at home?
Well, now there's a common thing where they might say whatever behavior I don't like happens, let's say it's under control at home, but happens at school. Or school has it under control, but it happens at home. Well, then you better find out what the other person's doing and start copying. That's the case. You see, the big mistake that people want to make sure they don't do is accidentally reward bad behavior. Okay, here's a really stupid one. the kid misbehaves and screams and yells in class, and they put him in the principal's office playing with an iPad. That is rewarding the kid for pitching a fit in class. You don't want to do that. You also have to figure out, is it behavior or is it biology? All right, let's look at some of the biology reasons for bad behavior. Frustration because they can't communicate. Sensory overload. Is it happening in the middle of a noisy Walmart? That's probably sensory overload. Or hidden painful medical problem. Nonverbal client, let's say you have a nonverbal older client that's been really good and now he's horrible. I'm going to bet you there's a hidden painful medical problem that he can't tell you about. Constipation, acid reflux, those are that kind of stuff is common. But there was a kid that had an earache. There was another kid shoved a bean up his nose and it rotted, and that's why he was having behavior problems. Then I used to sometimes laugh with no control about really, really, really stupid things. I could just get laughing. Laughing with no control at shower time, not the worst thing to happen. I'm much more concerned about head banging, biting. How do you handle gut issues when he doesn't tell you he's in pain?
Let's continue with your slides and we'll take some more questions.
All right, okay, let me just go through these slides and I'm going to get through them quickly. And these were more aimed at business people, these slides. Well, we've lost skills in skilled trades. And half of all 3D printers come from Europe. We'll go to the next slide. Bunch of stuff that Europeans make, we don't make because we took shop classes out of the schools. Like the state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine. We're not making that, even though it's based on our research. Yes, and I did experience sleep problems. Make sure they get plenty of exercise. That helps. Let's go to the next slide. Lots of gadgets there for my kind of mind to work on. Let's go to the next slide. Microscopes from Germany. Go to the next slide. Well, this is my industry. Everything you see on that floor is imported. And oftentimes built by people on the autism spectrum, dyslexic, ADHD. The clever engineering department, a good big bunch of them, 20, 25% would have a diagnosis. I'd rather see them building this equipment or working on that chip making machine than playing video games at home. Yep, you see there's a relationship here. Parachute cloth for the Mars rover from the UK. We can go to the next slide. Here's a Steve Jobs theater with me screaming in it. Structural glass walls. We don't make it. It came from Italy and Germany. We paid the price for taking all these hands-on classes out of the schools. And a lot of kids that have a special ed label, possibly they could excel in a job with lots of hands-on classes. I loved cooking, sewing, woodworking, and art. Loved those things. I had a toy sewing machine that actually sewed. I loved it. Let's go to the next slide.
Temple, do you recommend parents for schools that don't have these programs anymore in the schools? A lot of parents
That's
have
why I did this book right here, Calling All Minds, my kids' project book. And then I got another book. It's called The Outdoor Scientist. We got to get them out doing things. The other thing I'm looking at is what jobs are AI going to take out? And one of the jobs that will not take out is theater. And there is a Broadway show right now. I'm trying to find the playbill for it. Oh, here it is. 7 autistic actors in the lead on How to Dance in Ohio. Broadway. I went to opening night in December. Yeah.
So these types
AI
of
ain't touching this.
extracurricular activities would be good activities for parents to get their kids involved in if the school doesn't offer it. These would be some types of classes that they might do outside.
Oh yeah, you
outside
could go
of
to a lot of communities have art classes. There's theater groups. There's all kinds of things that they could get involved in. Even in poor communities, there's more stuff available than what you would think. The churches do a lot of activities. Get them out doing these things. They have church camps. These are all things that you could get out and do. 4-H, FFA. 4-H you could do outside of school. FFA, Future Farmers of America, you do that in school. Great program. Teaches public speaking. Also, they learn things like welding in 4-H. Well, just an example of minds working together. My grandfather, a mathematician, was co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes with another person that was definitely was autistic. They were a garage startup. They rented a loft over where they fixed trains, but the invention got ripped off. It was in the stolen version was in every warplane during World War II. They needed a verbal thinker. They needed a lawyer. They needed one real bad. Let's go to the next slide. All right, we're screening out our object visualizers. I can't do higher math, but I worked with a lot of people putting equipment into that, what used to be the IBP plants, now the Tyson plant in Texas, that were autistic, that built things for me, invented stuff. Worked on a center track restrainer. The first person who worked on that was autistic. I'm undiagnosed, owned a big shop. Yeah, I'm worried that let's adjust some of these math requirements, like maybe take statistics or business math or geometry. Let's go to the next slide.
One of the things that I think is most encouraging, Temple, is, she said I could not do algebra, but here she is, a professor of animal science at, Colorado State University. So even though you had shortcomings, related to your diagnosis, there were many, many things that you could do and that you did do.
Well,
and
that's
the
exactly
encouraging
right.
word.
I have a piece of equipment called the center track restrainer. I'll show it in just a minute. You got some big plants in Texas. They all have them. This airplane right here is owned by someone who cannot do algebra. He's building beef plants. He's building them all over the country. And I had to be tutored to get through statistics. I never have passed an algebra class. Thank goodness when I was a freshman, I didn't have to take it. I took a more finite math, probability, matrices, statistics. That was the required class at the time. But we need visual thinkers. College level math, I had to do statistics. I got a C in it. C as in Charlie. And I avoided every math class I could avoid. So I had to take a freshman math class. I had to drop a physics class. I had to drop a biomedical engineering class. Let me tell you, they need me. There was a big fiasco with a metal on metal hip where had gunk form in it that went into people's bodies. I wouldn't have made that mistake. The gigantic facet. There's a beautiful hydraulic power pack built by somebody that can't do algebra. Yeah, and just the way that there's a little kink there in the hoses, that's designed that way on purpose so it doesn't vibrate. That's center track restrainer system under construction. Yep, you got at least 3 of them in Texas right now. Lots of cattle going through it. Autism built that originally. But we need collaboration because the object visualizers work in the shop inventing the equipment, usually do not have advanced degrees. And the mathematical engineers do the boilers, the refrigeration, make sure the roof doesn't collapse, wind load, snow load, stuff like that. And now we have to have it design it so it just freeze solid too, something we're going to have to do. But how I managed for my degree, I took the freshman math. I majored in psychology. A lot less math requirements. My bachelor's is a psychology degree. I had to take 1 math class for it. My master's, I had to take 1 statistics class, tons and tons and tons of tutoring, tons and tons. PhD, another statistics class, tutor. I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. I couldn't do the math. But you
One thing,
aerospace people, you need me. Make sure the raccoons don't get in your stuff.
That's right. That's right. One thing that I'm thinking as you're talking here, Temple, is I'm thinking about the vocational rehab programs all across the United States, not just in Texas, that are state and federally funded programs. They have big dollars and they are designed to help an individual with a disability get to work. They do a lot of testing to identify what the impediments to employment might be, and they do a lot of tutoring, training to help close those gaps on the impediments to employment. And for our students that are listening today, Most schools have a VR counselor assigned to the school. Your guidance counselor at your school, your teacher in the program that you're in can help guide you to the VR program, but there are programs out there also with the Department of Labor.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with a lot of that, but I'm finding when I only run on a case by case, but some of it's not very creative in finding back doors into jobs. Also, there's some good programs going on right now that totally get rid of the interview process. One is TACT in Denver, teaching autistic community trades. They take young adults and they take some to a camp and they can try out all these different trade things, find out what they like. Then let me tell you how they do the classes. They teach life skills along with the mechanics. 6 students per class taught by a mechanic and a life skills coach. You got to show up on time. You got to be clean. You can't be swearing at work. And then they have contracts with car dealerships. They place them in car dealership shops. And there's a job coach in there for another 2 or 3 months. The car dealers love it. This is a specific example of something really good. Now, it's going to be my kind of mind. Because you have a word thinker, autistic, who loves history, they're going to hate auto mechanics. And is there any algebra required? No. I ran into a guy at the Denver airport. He fixes fighter jets. He can't do any higher math. He fixes all the electronics on fighter jets. Just did it in the military. Now he's out in the oil field. You know what he had to say about oil field equipment? Toys. Simple. I only use grade school arithmetic. Talked to him just the other day at the Denver airport. I don't know if I could pass an algebra class, but you see, I majored, 2 of the degrees were in psychology. That's one of the ways I got around it. So the only math that was required was statistics. And then animal science, it was statistics again. You see, that's how I got around the math requirements. And then I discovered, when I started working in the meat industry, like at the Momford Fab Shop, for example, back when our big plant here was Momford's back in the 80s, that there's all these guys in the shop inventing things. And then I found out they couldn't do algebra. I started interviewing them. Bad students. There's a guy selling a bunch of stuff to the cattle industry. 1 welding class. He's selling equipment all around the world. He can't do higher math. I can't tell you what it is because I can't identify him. And the other big problem I'm seeing is work skills need to be taught. Okay, I'm glad to hear there's a voc rehab now that's going with 14-year-olds. We need to start making the transition to the working world before they graduate from high school. Chores for little kids. We got to replace the paper routes with like a church volunteer job, walking dogs for the neighbors, something where they're doing a job on a schedule for a boss outside the home. Really, really important. Have a real job before you graduate from high school in the summer. You see, because I have all these granddaddies that come up to me and grandmoms that come up to me that discover they're autistic. And they're usually the type of autistic where there was either no speech delay or very, very little speech delay. This next slide just shows how we need to collaborate. Like, for example, when I did the visual thinking book, my thinking is associative and not linear. And then I worked with a verbal co-author to make it more linear. You see, that's the different minds working together. We need each other. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, architects make a building pretty, engineers make sure it's safe. Let's go to the next slide. 20% of the people I worked with were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD, owning metal shops. And then I hear today, they won't let the autistic kid take shop because of liability. In my generation, they owned the shops. This is what makes me very frustrated as I go back and forth between the worlds. And then another gigantic mistake the industry made was shutting down in-house engineering 20 years ago. Now there's no shops left. So I just heard that one of the big plants just bought 2 shops. But where are you gonna get your new mechanics? They're down in special ed now playing video games. There's a relationship between things like the door falling off the airplane and things like this and what's going on in the schools. You're a really good mechanic would tighten those bolts.
This is really so encouraging, Temple, that, all people that even learn differently, whether you're on the autism spectrum, whether you're dyslexic, maybe you were much older when you learned how to read, or you have ADHD, I think the really encouraging word is that there's a job for you. There is a job for you.
There is. And I'm a big believer in exposing the youngsters to lots of different things so you can see what they gravitate to. Because I've had parents say, well, my kid took apart some piece of equipment and got it back together again. Well, that's one that should become a mechanic. Now, the other thing is you've got to control, and we can read that slide yourself. I've already talked about that, but you've got to control anger. I had a lot of problems with anger and fighting. I got kicked out of 9th grade for fighting when kids bullied me. And what I had to do is I had to go from anger to crying. Crybabies work for NASA. You need to look up the 60 Minutes show when they shut down the space shuttle and canceled it. They were crying on camera and walking off because they'd been throwing wrenches. They wouldn't be allowed to work there. You have to switch anger to crying. And when I'd be in these big meatpacking plants, we're putting in some big jobs. I did a lot of this 80s, early 90s. I was out there in those plants. And something nasty would happen at work, and I'd go hide in the electrical room, not in the bathrooms. Every time I walk by a door labeled equipment room, electrical room, that's where I used to go to cry. And I know what not to touch, but I don't want anybody to see me. That's how I ended up dealing with anger. Don't get angry.
So, Temple, this is an important topic, and I want to go
a very important topic because these workplaces do not tolerate any. You throw something at NASA, you're fired. They fired a guy for throwing a briefcase.
So we have a lot of students here today, a lot of students maybe in middle school and high school. And the first thing that I want to say is the anger and the frustration that we feel as people it's a natural progression, but I use the word either react, which is usually a bad thing, or respond, which is usually the better thing, really, really matters. So I think it's important because Temple just told us that she herself dealt with anger issues herself, and things weren't always perfect, but she learned how to turn it around instead of throwing things or hitting someone.
Things. And every time I see a door labeled electrical room, it's my favorite. They don't lock them in a meat plant because when something's wrong, you've got to get in there. And a proper electrical room is all enclosed. The main thing you have to worry about is don't lean on the switches and turn something off. Right. Then they'd find me and never did that. But I had places like Cattle Catwalk under the stairs and another plant under the basement stairs. Places I would go.
But what I hear,
because that replaced throwing things, I would have been fired if I'd done that.
Yes. So what I hear is that cool down, and we talk to our kids about these types of things. So what is your place? Is it your room? Is it under the stairs? Is it somewhere where you can cool down and not do the things that you kind of want to do in the height of your anger? So I just wanted to pause a little bit because I know that a lot of families, a lot of professionals and teachers, they deal with this in the classroom, and a lot of students, we hear students that have disabilities say, I don't want to be this way. Like, I'm aware that I'm angry and I don't want to be this way. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit further about that.
I was horribly bullied, and I got kicked out of 9th grade out of a regular high school for throwing a book at a girl who called me a retard. And I went to special boarding school. I got in a giant fist fight in the cafeteria, and they took away horseback riding for 2 weeks. That was my favorite thing to do. And I somehow switched from anger to crying. It just happened. I was still miserable. I switched from anger to crying. Then there's a 60 Minutes show when they canceled the space shuttle. I was crying through this whole show. They were walking off the set, crying, walking off camera, crying. There's the center track restrainer right there. Why don't you put that back up on that slide? Autism built that. Yeah, that's a guy who was autistic built the first one of those for me. And he invented some stuff on the adjustable sides and on the chain conveyor. Yeah. That's is what awesome. Frustrates me. Yeah, you look at that big complicated piece of equipment built by special ed. Not this particular one, because this is a newer one, but the original one, special ed building. This is what frustrates me, as I go back and forth between the fields. Really, really frustrates me. It's all the most fun stuff I ever did in construction. Boy, we could geek out on how to build things, geek out and talk about how stupid the suits were. I didn't know at the time they were verbal thinkers. And yeah, I mean, we need to have verbal thinkers to run these businesses. Because a lot of these guys aren't very good at running the business part. Oftentimes the wife doesn't. Okay, the most about the word thing. This is probably the book that most people need to read, because I really discussed the job situation in visual thinking, hidden gifts of people who think in pictures, patterns, and abstractions. And it's a book that just came out last year. Okay, we discussed these architects. We can flip forward in the slides. There's a bunch of slides in here. Maybe we can just tell about them, where I talk about famous people that would be special ed kids. Michelangelo dropped out of school at 12, but exposed to great art, exposed to tools. You got to have that exposure so they can find out what they're good at. Then mentoring. Then he was apprenticed into a studio. Exposure, then mentoring. We'll go to the next slide. We'll go through this really quickly. Steve Jobs is probably on the spectrum. Einstein, no speech until age 3. What would happen to him today? Let's go to the next slide. Thomas Edison was probably on the spectrum. He learned how to work at a really young age. He was selling newspapers on the train, and he had a mentor that taught him how to use the telegraph. Let's go to the next slide. And here's a very famous autistic person, super good engineer, brilliant with rockets, brilliant with cars, brilliant with satellite communication, Twitter. I think rockets and cars might have been better. Let's go to the next slide. A Nobel Prize winner was more likely to win a science prize if they had a creative hobby. That's another reason why schools shouldn't be taking this stuff out. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's talk about some of the accommodations. Cannot multitask. Don't put me on the McDonald's takeout window. All the design work I did not require any multitasking. And then we already talked about the pilot's checklists, avoiding long strings of verbal instruction. That does not work. I'm seeing too many kids getting addicted to video games. They're not becoming video game designers. And I'll tell you right now, video game design and animation, AI is going to eat it alive. If a job is hands-on, AI is not going to touch it until we get truly intelligent robots again, and that's going to be a while. Just say for the next 20 years, the hands-on job.
Temple, on your checklist and not overloading, our kids on the autism spectrum or ADHD, they do have the working memory issues. And I hear from parents all the time, my child doesn't listen to me. They don't listen.
Okay, but they have if I was a computer, I'd be an Intel 286 with a warehouse full of graphics cards for visual memory. Okay, I always like to use an analogy. I need an external working memory. So if you're telling me what to do, let me write it down. Just let me write it down in bullet points. Very simple. I have no working memory. And it doesn't affect, figuring out whether the bolt on the door was put in or not. You see, I just see that. Doesn't put any load on working memory. But
so the checklist. The
checklist would save a ton of jobs, I'll tell you that right now.
That's for sure. I think of parents and how, like, in the evening, okay, go upstairs, brush your teeth, put your pajamas on, pick up your room, and get in bed. Well, that was way too many commands. Way too many commands. Yes.
Just make a checklist. Pilots have to do it every single flight. And on the little airplanes, it's like 10 items. But on the big airplane, when there's 100 items, they don't just chuck all that stuff at the pilots. They chunk it. 8 items in pre-taxi, 7 items in pre-takeoff. And then when you leave tower control, there's another checklist. It's chunked into parts of the flight. I've looked all this stuff up online. And there's also a book called The Checklist Manifesto, because the aviation has now taught hospitals how to use it to prevent mistakes during surgery. No, I don't have a working memory. I need an external working memory. and here's a sad job that was lost. Worked for a fencing company for years, building fences, got a new boss, yak, 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 built all the wrong stuff. Was fired. If he had just written it down, it wouldn't have happened. Oh, somebody really likes the checklist. And visual checklists with dry erase and markers, yeah, that's fine. I don't care what you have it on. You know, that's fine. Now, the other thing I did is I'd sell work by showing off my jobs. And let me just click through some of my jobs to see what no algebra can do. So very quickly, we'll go through these slides. Next slide. Could you put the next slide up, please? Hello? Next slide.
We're on the slide with the cattle. Is that the one that you want?
No, I don't. I'm not seeing it.
Uh-oh.
You did something.
Okay, hold on 1 second.
You did something to it because I was seeing.
Bear with me 1 second.
All right, well, then we'll use paper slides. I've got them right here. All I'm going to do, show you. All right, I showed them the drawings. Here, now let me go back up. I want to show them my drawings. Back up. I want them to see my drawings because that's how I sold jobs. There. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, there's one of my drawings with dip that I did in the 70s. I showed people my drawings and I got respect. We'll show the slide. I sold Cargill. I designed the front end for every Cargill beef plant in North America. That's on. I'll show you the drawing I sold Cargill with. I sent that drawing to the head of Cargill back in the late 80s. I showed my work. This is what no algebra can do. See, there's two parts of engineering here. Let's flick through the photos, and then that's the end of the slides. All right, that's a picture I sent him. I wanted a 30-second wow. We can go to the next slide.
Temple, I think this is worthy of a little bit further discussion because, you know, Temple in her visual thinking, she totally transformed the cattle industry and how cattle go to slaughter in the U.S. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that? And I know it's all in your movie, but tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, basically, when I first started out, I thought I could fix everything with equipment. And I designed, I think, some pretty nice equipment. Center track restrainers did that 30 years ago. It's still in all your big plants. You know, just about every feedlot in Texas ships cattle to a center track restrainer system that I originally worked on developing. First one built by somebody with autism. Next time you pass one of those plants, want to think about that. And when I sold it by showing off the work, now I lost my train of thought. This is where I get a working memory issue.
That's okay. That's totally okay. It's just, you know, she could see in the movie.
So what I did was I built equipment, and I built some really nice equipment. But that doesn't replace management. They have to operate it correctly. A lot of young engineers don't get that. They think they can fix it all with equipment. There's the one they recreated for the movie. I loved that. And then one of the things I'm most proud of is a very simple evaluation system I made for slaughterhouses, where you just scored 5 very simple little things. Like you had to get 95% of those cattle dead on the first shot, or you failed the McDonald's audit. I implemented back 20 years ago the McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's audits. Now they had to manage the stuff. Not just have it, manage it, maintain it, operate it correctly.
Temple, sometimes in movies, made-for-TV movies, they take liberties that weren't accurate. It's true that you feel pretty great about the HBO movie, and it was a good depiction of how things went down. Is that correct?
Well, let's look at the things that are accurate. Visual thinking is shown accurately in that movie. The projects shown in that movie, I did all those projects. Those are shown accurately. That crazy cuckoo horse, no, that's an exaggeration. The main characters were showed nicely. My mother, Anne, and Mr. Carlock. He actually was a NASA space scientist. Now, there's one thing in that movie that's different. There's a scene in the doctor saying she should go to the institution. Well, actually, the thing that happened was the first doctor I went to was a neurologist when I was 2.5, and they recommended a speech therapy school that 2 teachers taught in the basement of their small house. is what actually happened. But what that doctor in the movie was very typical 50s of what would have been recommended. So that's something that wasn't the same. That's just another job picture, just to show off the work. Yes, and I have seen the show The Good Doctor. Yep, I've seen that.
That's good. So I think we're almost out of time. So
okay, and we're done with the slides. So that's just all the slides I was going to show. And I can stay over a bit if you want.
Yes. So anybody that can stay over, you're invited to stay over, because we are going to get to the questions, because we wanted to get through.
I wasn't planning on showing these slides, but that's just my work experience there. And I can stay over for a while. That's fine. Okay.
Why don't you pull up the chat box and kind of see some of the questions? We've got a lot in there. We've had a lot of comments.
All right. Let's just
take the questions that you would like to take.
Well, you could use audio checklists. So I'm trying to figure out where the questions started. Here's question 1155, using PEX cards. Yep, that sounds like a good idea. Now then, learning to drive. That's a big barrier. Let's say a few things about that. I was very lucky that my aunt's mailbox was 3 miles away from the house on a dirt road, because that's where I learned to drive a manual shift 3 on the tree with a horrible clutch. I was able to practice a long time in a totally safe place. That was really important.
Temple, one of the things that I did with my kids was disability driving training, and they are all throughout the United States. We had it here in the greater Houston area, where there are organizations specifically that teach behind the wheel for individuals with a disability. And I know for the greater Houston area, Tira Memorial Hermann, any hospital that does stroke evaluations to get people that have had a stroke back on the road, they have a in-office, testing that they can do to learn if an individual has the faculties that they need to be a safe driver on the road. So I recommend that test first.
That's a good idea. That's a really good idea. But
if they test
you see, a way to deal with a small processor is to practice driving the car in a safe place until you don't have to think about how to push the brake, how to push the accelerator. Now, one advantage I did have is I had a bicycle as a child. I rode it everywhere. I knew how to steer. I did not have to learn how to steer. That was something I already knew how to do. Tension shifting, slowness, this all goes back. There's a slide in there about short processing problems. Can you back up? There's a thing. Yeah, let's look at that slide, because that slide right there, you run into a lot of problems. Rapid conversation. I have a difficult time following the chit chat back and forth. It goes too fast. Rapid multitasking. Now I can multitask and say, now, okay, I'm going to do a Zoom call for an hour and then I'm going to work on a paper. I can do that. But the very rapid kind of multitasking, like a McDonald's takeout window. Now, a lot of these individuals, rapid response to a question, have trouble with that. We already talked about remembering long strings of verbal instructions. I also interrupted Allison. I can't figure out when to break in. It goes by too fast. This is an important slide. If you want to copy this slide and send it all around to everybody, that's just fine with me.
Today, everybody's going to get a copy of today's slides. We're going to email that out. This is being recorded and it's going to live on our YouTube channel. And I would say on the driving thing, like I said, do that testing. Call your local hospital that does the stroke evaluations. Pay and get that evaluation done. If a student passes that evaluation, it will show that they have the processing speed to act quickly if they need to behind the wheel. It'll be they either pass it or they don't. If they don't pass it, maybe you try again in 5 years and you don't do behind the wheel now. If they do pass it, then my recommendation is to do behind the wheel with a disability driving organization. Most behind the wheel training organizations don't do.
The problem is I work with a lot of places where there's no services. There's nothing.
There are remote areas all across the country.
There are other states who I'm not going to name them. They're outside of Texas. And not going to name them, but they have literally no services, especially in the rural areas. Well, the open big field or the high school parking lot Sunday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning is where you start. That's all they have.
So we have a question here for our students at LISD in our transition program. They want to know, what do you feel was your biggest hurdle to get your first job? What a great question. Thanks, guys,
I tell
for
you,
submitting.
that in the movie is correct. There's a scene in there where I go up to the editor of the magazine and I get his card. And that scene is absolutely real. Because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would really help my career. And then I produced a summary of my master's thesis on cattle behavior and different types of cattle squeeze shoes. That was a back door into a job. And that was one of my very first jobs. I became livestock editor for the Arizona Farmer Ranchman magazine. I was a journalist. That was my first job. No math in that. Although the arithmetic I could do fine. I know how to size hydraulic cylinders, pi times the radius squared, because it's a very specific thing. Well, I used to size them deliberately on head holders so they couldn't injure the cattle with them. And they could put it on full plant pressure at 80 psi and you wouldn't hurt their head. I did that on purpose.
I
I
hear
know how to
you.
do that kind of math. That kind of math I know how to do.
Let's see. So one person says, my son, hang on, okay, yes. Diagnosed with autism at age 1. Oh, autism 1 at age 15. Let me get that right. That matters. The age when he wants to be exactly like everyone else, but he's not. He does not acknowledge his uniqueness. I'm sorry, it's scrolling on me here.
Well, I'm reading it right now.
Instead, does all he can do to hide it. He's never willing to discuss it and refuses social education. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Well, he's going to need some education. You see, the first step is he's got to realize that he's has to change some stuff. And I had to learn. I got infatuated with the carnival ride in high school. I would talk about the carnival ride to the point where everybody else was totally bored with it. I had to learn not to do that. Also, I would work on friends who shared interests. This is where autistic people really get along. Then the whole issue comes up of masking. Well, I've learned to do basic social. You greet people, you say hi to people in the corridors. That's easy to do. But I'm not going to be the social bar scene person. I don't do that. But you have to do some conforming. Being a rude, filthy, dirty slob, that just doesn't cut it. And now I'm realizing I'm probably the wrong set of slides. I should have just had my autism presentation.
It's okay. It's okay. And honestly, I'm glad you sent us a long set of slides because we're providing the slides to everybody and everybody does want to see this. So thank you for that. Do you have any suggestions on helping stimming behavior?
Well, what was done with me was stimming. When I did stimming, and I used to like to just spin and then watch the room spin, or twirl a little brass plate that was on the bedpost that covered a bolt up. And I had times where I was allowed to do it because stimming calms you down. Now, if you do it all day, then you're not going to learn anything. So I was allowed to do an hour after lunch in the bedroom, spinning the brass plate, twirling, things like that. One way to handle it is have some specific times where you let them do it, as long as it's not anything injurious. And spinning a brass plate or dribbling sand through my fingers, it's not going to hurt anything. But then with other places, was not allowed to do it. Dining room table, for example. We were going to take turns in conversation.
We had some success in this. It sounds silly in learning with a child that learned differently, letting her spin around in the chair while she did her sight words, or letting her use a fidget spinner while she was working on some type of school thing. And that activity actually helps. So as parents,
we're wired.
We're wired to say, no, don't do that.
No. There's some situation, but then we used a fidget spinner, which doesn't make a noise, because if you do it in a classroom, it has to be something to bother people. I used to take pens you know, and shove them down on the table and make them click. That drove people crazy. But if it's something like a fidget spinner or a ball, or oh, I've even got a cow in a suit. Isn't he cute? Oh, the cow in the suit. And here is the pickup I learned to drive on, right here. 3 on the tree, terrible clutch. And this was being given out by the credit union. So a squeezy antique pickup truck.
So a squish ball, a fidget
That's
spinner, various other
Yes.
things, if that's what helps in kind of finding the appropriate time, but sometimes it might be a learning time.
No,
Dr.
that's some,
Grandin,
those are some things you can allow. They don't disrupt the classroom in any way. That helps them to learn. Fine. Another thing is these balls they sit on that you kind of have to balance on. It's another thing I've seen that helps some people. Yeah,
we love that bouncy ball. We got a lot of spelling words done with the bouncy ball. It was really good.
Then you use it. Yeah, you see, this is where you know, we look at what we need to do with accommodations. I always want to figure out real simple things that you can do. Balls are not very expensive. I'm always looking at costs. I also come out of the construction industry, so I had to. Okay, why should they get this center track restrainer? Because I think it's going to reduce their workman's comp claims. That's how I would sell equipment and take out one person. That's how I sold them. Well, I knew how to do that costing.
Dr. Grandin, you have provided us with a wonderful presentation today, and everybody in the chat box is singing your praises and kudos and thanking you for being here with us today. And it's certainly been our pleasure, and we look forward to having you back. We're hoping to schedule something in person maybe later in 2024. Well, that's to come. We'll let you know once we get that set up. Today, you guys are going to get a copy of today's slides, all the slides, a link to the recording. The recording is going to live on the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel. I put the name of that in the chat box. So you guys can watch that later and get those slides. When you get this presentation, this is going to have a link to our upcoming webinars and the topics that we've got coming up over the next month or two. So you can register for any one that might make the most sense for you. We're certainly glad that you guys have been here with us today. We stand here ready to help you as you plan for your loved one with a disability. For all of our professionals here, I know we've had a lot of educators here today. We've had people from the Texas Workforce Commission, Workforce Solutions, talking about VR. Someone said in the chat box, if your child is in VR, they may actually pay for the disability driving evaluation that we were talking about. So that was really, really good feedback in the chat box. But thanks so much for being with us here today, Temple. Thank you for giving us hope and encouragement. And for all of the students that are out there today, you've got this. You totally have this. You have skills, you are important, and you need to go deeper and wider on the things that you're good at and the things that you love, and find a profession that will allow you to expand your knowledge in those areas. It doesn't matter.
Let's just go over the profession. The visual thinkers like me, for a lot of us, a very high-end skilled trade, because the people I worked with, they weren't just, you know, like fixing, just repairing elevators. They were actually inventing equipment, patenting equipment. And there's a lot of people were becoming an electrician or a plumber or a car mechanic. I know one car mechanic is a real super good diesel mechanic, but you'd go out to lunch with him, couldn't talk about anything, but a really good diesel mechanic. That was the right job for him. And there's going to be a visually minded people where a skilled trade is a place to go. And the other good thing is AI is not going to take it away. I'm watching that very, very closely. Oh, video game design, AI is going to eat it up. Animation, AI is going to eat it. Low-level programming of web pages is going to be eaten by AI. If it's hands-on.
But these
let's say live theater. AI is not going to touch it. Live concerts, it's not going to be touched. Nurses, teachers to work with special need kids. AI is not touching any of that stuff.
These skilled trades, a lot of times skilled trades are a license or a certificate or a 2-year program, not a 4-year degree program. Because a lot of our students think, I can't go to college. Sometimes they feel they're not smart enough to go to college, but there are trade programs, license programs, certificate programs out there where you can get certified to do these things. And a lot of these skilled trades make more money annually than a lot of the counterparts that went to a 4-year university.
I'll tell you another secret I learned when I first started. All the things I make is in what's called industrial process equipment. No license required. Industrial process equipment. Now, I didn't do any of the electrical stuff on it. Hydraulics. Yeah. I worked with people that barely graduated from high school. And
So
let me
awesome.
tell you, those plants, the next time you drive by them, that equipment's in those plants right now, 30 years later, still being used.
So encouraging. Thank you, Temple, for your powerful message. Guys, check out the movie Temple Grandin on HBO Max, Hulu Premium, or you can rent it for $3.99 on Amazon Prime. For the students, ask your mom first. Don't just buy that. But check that movie out. If you were encouraged today, you will be even more encouraged by the movie. Check out her book, Visual Thinking, released in 2022, and Navigating Autism. And Temple, we'll be back with you again soon. It's certainly been our pleasure. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and thanks for hanging over. We pride ourselves on not going over, but we wanted to get to your questions, so we appreciate the extra time that you spent with us today. Thanks so much. Take care.